Hello and welcome to the next installment of Ranking 007, and happy James Bond Day. You may or may not know that 62 years ago today, Dr. No released in theaters, so I thought I would celebrate James Bond Day with, of course, a Ranking 007 episode, but I would do it in a bit more casual way. This is going to be a briefer episode of Ranking 007 because we're talking about the gun barrels, and before you think that how the hell could he possibly rank the gun barrels, they're this totally trivial, inconsequential thing about the franchise, but they are very iconic, one of the most iconic aspects of the Bond franchise, and they're all different. They're all unique, albeit some of the differences are very minute, but they're all different. So that means I was able to compile a ranking. Some of these ranking points I feel very strongly about. Others I could sort of take it or leave it. But we have 25 gun barrels, of course. Every single film has had a gun barrel, even though the placement of them has changed over time. But yeah, this is my ranking of the James Bond gun barrel sequences, starting at number 25. So just a second ago when I said I had some strong opinions about the gun barrel sequences, most of those strong opinions apply to Spectre. This is by far, and I don't know how anybody could even argue this, the worst gun barrel sequence in the franchise. And it's particularly heinous because it's so unbelievably half-assed. It's so obvious when you're watching Spectre throughout the movie as a whole, really, but particularly in the gun barrel sequence. Right from the start, it looks like there was no care put into it. And I know I should put my foot in my mouth saying that because, of course, there was, but it feels like the attention to detail was just thrown out the window. First of all, you have the gun barrel itself, which is the classic Maurice Binder design, which in itself is phenomenal. But it's been, at the point when Spectre came out, it was 20 years since they've been doing a CGI-generated gun barrel. So now they're going to go back to a static image, which we haven't seen since License to Kill. So that's already a bit bizarre. You have Craig walking on, he's good, his performance is good, but if you look closely, you can see the gun in his hand, swinging it clearly, which totally defeats the purpose of the gun barrel sequence. The whole point is Bond's walking casually along, and then before you know it, he turns and shoots down the camera and kills his assailant. But you're supposed to think that he has no idea initially until he, bam, gets the drop on the guy. Here, Craig's just swinging the gun around like he's ready to pick a fight. That defeats the whole purpose of the gun barrel. Okay, so his pose is fine, his walk is fine, the blood comes down, it's the exact same blood PNG that they've used for the past 3 films, which we'll talk about those gun barrels later on. But then Bond fades out of the gun barrel, then the gun barrel itself fades to black, and then we get that absolutely horrible and horribly annoying, pretentious Dead or Alive. The whole sequence just screams of Sam Mendes not wanting to do it, which is bizarre because you can hear him say in interviews that he wanted to do the gun barrel for Skyfall, and he always intended for it to be at the start of Skyfall, but it just didn't kind of really work with the shot that they had planned for the opening of that film, which I agree. And I think having it at the end of Skyfall is fine, but for the big return of the gun barrel at the beginning, they give us this completely half-assed mess of a gun barrel, which is just so bad. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I think this is easily number 25. So let's talk about number 24. Yeah, another Craig gun barrel. This one fails for different reasons than Spectre's. It looks like they at least tried to make a somewhat half-decent gun barrel sequence, except it's way too fast. Craig sprints on down the white sound stage, shoots at the camera, he's like hunched over, he looks like he can't be bothered to do it. The gun barrel itself, the design, is this really bland-looking CG graphic. I'm assuming it was done by MK12, who did the title sequence for Quantum of Solace, but it looks terrible. There's that blood PNG the first time we see it come down, and everything just happens so quickly, and before you know it, you're looking at the title of the film. It's like a quick, like Quantum itself, is just a quick over way too quickly, and you can't even really process what you've just seen. It's a really bland, crappy gun barrel. I understand why it's at the end of the film, because it's the end of the Vesper storyline, which started with the gun barrel in Casino and then ended with this one. But compared to Casinos, the Quantum gun barrel compared to Casinos is unbelievably shit. It definitely deserves to be in the 24th spot. So let's talk about number 23. I know a lot of people don't like Die Another Day's gun barrel, but for me, it's pretty inoffensive. The bullet thing is stupid, but I've heard Lee Tamahori talk about it, and it was just supposed to be kind of like a goofy little joke for the anniversary, the 40th anniversary, which is fine. It makes absolutely no sense, and it's stupid, but that really kind of fits with Die Another Day as a whole, frankly. The music itself, the music is the techno sound that is imbued throughout Die Another Day, which I don't really like, but it's David Arnold, so it's good for what it is. And then you have the fact that it's the sort of like grayscale gun barrel. All the Brosnan films use the same footage of Brosnan, which I've always kind of thought was weird, but we'll talk about that later. But the fact that it's this grayscale gun barrel, the bullet comes down, and everything about it just feels kind of off to me, and it's hard to explain. And that feeling definitely translates to the film as a whole. That there was just sort of this kind of clunky attitude towards making Die Another Day, and it just things were getting out of control, as we all know. Then the franchise needed to reboot, and you can almost kind of feel that right out the gate with the gun barrel. It's a really weird feeling. But yeah, I don't hate this gun barrel. From the rest of the list, I think they're either okay or good or great. I think really just Spectres and Quantums are legitimately god awful. But Die Another Days is dumb but okay. So that's number 23. Let's get number 22. So this is the first of the classic gun barrels to be mentioned, and it's also nearly at the very bottom of the list. Thunderballs is not one of my favorites for many reasons. First of all, I hate the brown color that's the sort of filter that's all over it. Connery, it's the first gun barrel to actually feature Connery. The first three, which all use the same footage, were stuntmen. Bob Simmons as Bond. But Connery's performance, I always think in this gun barrel was crap. I mean, it's used for the next two Connery films as well. But he walks on is fine, but then he gets down and he sort of wobbles, and it looks like it's not very Connery. Connery's sort of really competent, and this feels very not that. So I thought, do another take. They must have had other takes that were better. I don't know why they decided to do this one. But I do like the really, really fat sounding tube, but wom, wom, sort of going throughout this gun barrel, which I always thought was kind of funny. But Thunderball is not one of my favorite Bond films, but the gun barrel is okay, minus some things that I think are really bad about it. But so that's why it's at the bottom of this list. But a lot of the classic gun barrels I really love, as we'll get into later on. So that's number 22. Let's get into number 21. So the last Roger Moore gun barrel, I think, is definitely his weakest. Not because it's objectively bad. I think it's just the least memorable of his. There are a few others that I think are also quite bland, but they're memorable for other reasons. This one, I think, is just, it's well, first of all, it's the second version of Roger Moore's gun barrel. The first two Roger Moore films, Live and Let Die, Man with the Golden Gun, use one footage, and then the rest of his films used a second footage, starting with Spy Who Loved Me. And I've always preferred the first footage. I don't think that's a popular opinion, but this gun barrel itself, the music is kind of like oddly sluggish, and that'll also apply when I talk about Octopussy. But it just feels kind of uninteresting, and that's kind of how I applied a feeling I apply to the film as a whole. It's sort of forgettable, which is a shame for Roger Moore's last film, who obviously was a great Bond, but this gun barrel is not great. It's just okay. So that's number 21. Let's get into number 20. Yeah, so not a surprise here, probably. This is Octopussy's, which is very similar to The View to a Kill one. Actually, the music is even slower, which I think is actually a thing that would put it below The View to a Kill one, but visually it's just a little bit better than A View to a Kill's gun barrel. It's just a little bit brighter, and it's not quite so... The colors are mismatched, and I noticed a lot of times in the Roger Moore era, like the gun barrel is like a very white color, very brown color, and then like the sound stage where the footage is shot from is like a very different color and doesn't match. Because nowadays they have a pure white background, and like the Brosnan era, it matched the white of the gun barrel. And I think that works a lot better. I don't know why they have these sort of clashing, color grading schemes going on with the gun barrels, but it's very evident in the later Roger Moore films where it's just kind of like, get a gun barrel. They've been the process is not changing, so they're just sort of churning them out at this point. So yeah, Octopussy is just a little bit better than Video Kills, but really you could swap these two. But when I made this list, I just happen to like Octopussy's more. So that's number 20. Let's get into number 19. Yeah, Skyfalls is a bizarre one because I never liked it. I didn't like it when I first saw it in theaters, even though it's this big bombastic moment at the end of the film. It's the sort of the second time Bond has become Bond. He sat there in M's office with a new M, Ray Fiennes, and it's this big bombastic moment, which I think works, and it's a nice tying to the 50th anniversary, which the gun barrel fades into, the logo for the 50th anniversary, which I like a lot. But the gun barrel itself, it's this another horrible CG graphic. It's like this weird blue color, but it looks totally fake. And I don't know if I'm just so used to this sort of more, I don't know, the weird design that Maurice Binder had that's very not symmetrical, and it looks very sort of hand-drawn. When you have these sort of CG ones that are like so clean and perfect, it just looks really bizarre, even though that's probably more realistic to how a gun barrel would look, with just shiny metal. It just doesn't have any character to it. But otherwise, the gun barrel is not my favorite. But Craig himself, his performance is great. It's a good strong walk, good strong turn, and the blood PNG from the past, from Quantum of Solace comes down, and it looks like fade to the logo. It's a nice triumphant moment for the end of the film, even though if you look kind of closely, in my opinion, it's kind of a crappy gun barrel. But otherwise, a great end to a great film. So that's number 19. Let's get on to number 18. I have almost nothing to say about the gun barrel from Moonraker except that it's perfectly average. At least Moonraker's doesn't have anything that actively offends me like the previous gun barrels I've mentioned in this list. It does its job, it's perfectly good, and that's all I can really say about it. I like it more than most of the things in Moonraker, at least. So that's number 18. Let's get on to number 17. A lot of the attributes that I just used to describe Moonrakers apply to the Man with the Golden Gun, but as I mentioned before, I prefer this version of Moore's gun barrel. I prefer his walk and his stance here, even though he doesn't actually shoot down the camera. It's a little bit off-center. But yeah, this is, because it's my favorite Moore footage, it puts it above Moonraker, which otherwise they would be almost identical in my ranking, but there's that little factor there that puts it a little bit above Moonraker for me. But it's just another serviceable gun barrel, nothing particularly amazing about it. It's just fine. So that's number 17. On to number 16. Diamonds Are Forever is a very interesting one because it takes a lot of aspects from the previous film's gun barrel on Majesty's, which I haven't talked about yet. And it uses that shining effect, which I think works very well, given the movie's called Diamonds Are Forever. It has that same Connery footage, which is kind of, it has very, very classic sounding Barry score. A lot of things are here working. I think if they had shot a different gun barrel for Connery's last film, he was gone. They could have shot another one of him coming back. If his performance was a bit stronger, this would be a very high ranking gun barrel for me. But again, I can't stand the way he wobbles and sort of gets down. I don't know. It's such a stupid thing to harp on, I know, but I'm talking about the gun barrels for goodness sake, so I'm going to talk about stupid details. Don't you worry. But yeah, I think it deserves to be sort of towards the middle of this list because there's really good things about it, but there's also some stuff that kind of puts me off. So that's number 16. On to number 15. Of the two Dalton gun barrels, this is the most classic one. It has Barry's very classic sounding score, and it was Barry's last score for the franchise. You have Dalton doing very confident walk and very, actually it's an okay pose. I've always thought Dalton's gun barrel performance was very strong. The gun barrel itself, classic design, and this is the end of that. We have one more film after this that uses that design, but it does feel a little bit tired at this point. But it's not like they were going to be using a CG graphic in 1987, even though I guess theoretically they could have. It would have been very early CG graphics, but it's fine. At least with the next gun barrel, with License to Kill, they do stuff that's pretty unique and different. It makes it stand out. Living Daylights doesn't have that, but it's a very, very good gun barrel nonetheless. So that's number 15. On to number 14. I've always had a soft spot for You Only Live Twice, and that applies to the gun barrel, I think. It's a very fun movie, and the gun barrel is fun, too. It has that very unique Japanese-inspired sound that Barry used with the guitar, and I think it's really cool. And it's also in black and white for some reason, which I don't know why it's like that, but I kind of like that. I prefer that to, like, the previous film in Thunderball, where it's this really awful colored brown. The black and white is a nice, clean look, which they kind of adapted or, followed later on down the line. But this is a good gun barrel, and I think it's one of the ones that's very effective at setting the sort of style for the film and the tone. And just sort of like Die Another Day sets up a goofy film. This one sets up, the sort of, well, with the soundtrack especially, the sort of more East Asian sound, and because the whole film is set there. But it's a fun gun barrel. It's good. It's one that I've always particularly liked a lot. So that's number 14. On to number 13. I bet a lot of people would rank this one very high, but as I said, I don't love this performance of the second performance from Moore. I think he just sort of walks on kind of too casually, and the turn is way too slow towards the camera. It doesn't look like there's any urgency. It looks like a very staged thing, I know, at least. But with the first one, it looks like he's like sort of drawing his gun like he's about to get shot, and he just notices the guy. It's like like the Wild West or something. But here it's very casual, sort of drops and shoots. And I don't love the music. I don't love Marvin Hamlish's rendition of the Bond theme, and I know that's kind of sacrilegious to say because of Bond 77, which is great, but his sort of just plain Bond theme, The Spy Who Loved Me, I don't really like that much. So for that reason, The Spy Who Loved Me gun barrel is kind of above a lot of the others just because it's so iconic and so many people love it, and I love the film so much. And I'm happy when I see it. There's a lot of elements to it that where I'm like, I don't know, I kind of wish that was different. But overall, the sum of the parts is a very, very solid gun barrel. So that's number 13. On to number 12. The gun barrel for Unmanaged Secret Service is definitely an anomaly. I mean, obviously it's the only one that George Lazenby did, but there's a lot of unique elements to it. First of all, it starts with how Harry Saltzman and Albert R. Broccoli present dialogue over the gun barrel dots coming across, and then it comes in, which we haven't seen since Doctor No, and it begs the question. I guess this was because this was a reboot essentially for Bond, bringing in a new actor, a soft reboot. It's were they going to plan to do that for every new Bond actor, because they didn't do that for Live and Let Die? I don't know. But I like that it's sort of like starting fresh. I've always liked that. But then you have Lazenby come in. Lazenby's walk is excellent. I like the fact that he gets down on one knee. Whether it was because he gets married in the film or not, I don't think they really considered that. I think it was just Lazenby did a bunch of funny things, poses, and they went with that one. But I think it works well in a sort of metatextual way. And I like that Bond disappears when the blood comes down, which is not something that always happens. I've always liked that. But there are some bits of clunkiness to the gun barrel. There's bits where he's walking in place, and it would have been very easy to fix that. I don't know maybe they were rushed to make it, but it would have been extremely easy to fix that. But I also like this. You have the shimmering effect, which they use again for diamonds. Overall, this gun barrel it stands out, and I think like the film itself, really makes a stylistic point, like Peter Hunt, the director, clearly wanted to do with On Her Majesty's, and it definitely comes across. And for that, it's one of my favorite gun barrels. So that was number 12. On to number 11. The World Is Not Enough is another one where I don't have that much to say about it. It's Brosnan. His performance is perfect. The music, David Arnold's score, is kind of a little different, a little bit of a shakeup, which I like. But other than that, it's just a very solid gun barrel. It also is the only one that I can recall that actually opens on Bond himself, which was a little bit different for 1999. But yeah, it's just like a perfectly good gun barrel. Nothing great about it, but a lot of it's very, very good. So that's number 11. Let's get into the top 10. So No Time to Die's gun barrel is probably the most unique of the entire franchise, and it's sparked a lot of debate in the Bond fandom. Obviously, you have the fact that Bond disappears in the gun barrel itself before you go through the gun barrel, and it opens up into the scene, which is, I think, a very cool effect. The fact that there's no blood, is it because Bond misses and Bond dies in the film? I don't know. Again, it's like Majesty's. I don't know if they intended that, but it works. They just sort of got lucky, and it works well to interpret it that way. But visually, this is my, except for the Brosnan era CG graphic, this is my favorite CG graphic of the gun barrel. I think it bests all the previous ones we've seen in Craig. I love the look of it. I love the white cleanness of it, which I know I complained about the cleanliness of some of the other ones, but it looks real, but also has like a bit of a style to it. Craig's performance is excellent. You can just kind of see the gun that he's walking with, but for the most part he's hiding it, and he's got a great final pose. And of course the music. I'm a big fan of Hans Zimmer's score for No Time to Die, and I love the gun barrel music. I remember hearing it for the first time in 2021, October 2021, seeing those dots coming across the screen. It felt like such a great apology after the horrible gun barrel we got in Spectre. This one, although this one takes some big swings, it definitely feels more like a classic Bond gun barrel than Spectre's, which ironically had a lot more classic elements than this one did. But this one just does the gun barrel sequence so much better. So that's the start of the top 10 of this list. Let's move on to number 9. From Russia with Love's gun barrel is probably the most classic, and it's probably considered by many to be a bit sort of too traditional and forgettable for that. It doesn't do anything different, but it is the first of its kind. I mean, we have Dr. No's, which I'll get into, which set up the gun barrel, but it does things very differently than From Russia with Love's, which is the start of the classic Bond theme starts across the dots. Bond walks in, shoot, bloods come down, move on. It doesn't open, the dot doesn't open up into the scene. That doesn't happen until later on, but it's the start of this formation, the structure of the gun barrel. So for that, I think it's very, very important. I also, I prefer the Bob Simmons performance to Connery's, and I know that's ridiculous to say because it isn't even actually the Bond actor. And I like the little jump he does. I don't know, maybe I'm just nostalgic for it, but I think the From Russia with Love gun barrel is like the quintessential gun barrel. So for that, it breaks my top 10 at number 9. So let's get to number 8. Goldfinger's gun barrel is almost identical to its predecessor. The only difference being, for that I've noticed, is the music. The music is a bit more sort of jazzy, a bit more funky, a bit more up-tempo, which I like. And I think that actually kind of weirdly reflects the film. The film itself is a bit more jovial and fun than the previous 2 films. So I don't know if that was maybe Barry was just feeling a bit more loose when making it, he had a bit more fun making the score, so he thought that would translate into the gun barrel. I don't know, but it works very well. And this, like From Russia with Love, is just a quintessential gun barrel. It's one of the many that makes it one of the reasons why the gun barrel itself is so iconic, and Bond as a whole, the iconography of Bond. I mean, you see that iconic Maurice Binder design, you might probably think of Goldfinger, and when you think of that and Bond. But yeah, it's pretty perfect. But there are a few more that I enjoy a little bit more than Goldfinger's, so that's why it's at number 8. So let's get to number 7. Like I just mentioned, Goldfinger's being the quintessential gun barrel. I think Tomorrow Never Dies is the quintessential gun barrel of the more modern era. It has Brosnan's excellent performance, the CGI-generated image of the gun barrel, and you have the first David Arnold score for Tomorrow Never Dies, which is one of his best. And he came out swinging with his first one because he wasn't sure that he was going to get any more to do. And you have, I think, what sounds like it's definitely meant to be an homage to John Barry, that gun barrel score, and it's just, it's perfection. It's a perfect gun barrel, but it doesn't do anything super standout like the ones that are above it on this list. So for that, it gets number 7. And at number 6, we have the first gun barrel sequence. It's pretty amazing if you think about it that they had the gun barrel sequence in place since the first film. You have the opening, which says Harry Saltzman, Albert R. Broccoli, like Majesty's did, and you have this very interesting sound design with the beep, boop, beep, doop, and he walks on, and then bang, there's no music, and he bang, and then the Bond theme comes in as the blood's coming down. It's very impactful, and it's such a great, I can imagine sitting in the theaters 62 years ago today, actually, and just hearing that and thinking, okay, I'm in for a ride, and that's exactly what the gun barrel should do, and I think this one achieves it better than most, and funny enough, it's the first one. I absolutely love this gun barrel. Could be nostalgic for me, I don't know. It is also the only gun barrel to transition directly into the title sequence, and obviously we have pre-title sequences going forward. But yeah, I think it's a very special gun barrel, and if you're watching the Bond films in order in a marathon, it just feels like you're starting a beautiful thing when you watch this film, and you're like, okay, this is Bond. I'm ready. I'm ready for this run, and I've always loved it. I've loved it since I watched it when I was a kid, and I still love it to this day. But there are a few more that I just enjoy a little bit more. So Dr. No gets number 6. Now into the top 5. Let's get into it. For Your Eyes Only is one that I don't think a lot of people necessarily rank that highly. for me, it's really the music. The music, I love Bill Conti's score throughout the whole film for the most part. I like that it's very different, and I know a lot of people hate the synthesizer sound that penetrates a lot of For Your Eyes Only, and the very sort of rock, and it sounds very 80s. But I think it gives a great energy to the film and the action sequences, and that applies to the gun barrel too. I love the very powerful, impactful sounding music of the gun barrel, and it's wonderfully energetic, which I think is a total opposite from the previous film Moonraker, which had a totally forgettable gun barrel, low energy film in my opinion as a whole. And then you have For Your Eyes Only, which is coming back, they're grounding the film again, but they're also giving it a bit more youthful energy by having this young guy who's doing the score and making it very contemporary, and that applies to the gun barrel. And I also like how the gun barrel is very bright. Like I said before, a lot of the more ones have this weird sort of color grading, but For Your Eyes Only, it's just like they just chalk that brightness right up. And I think that's quite nice, and it makes it look very appealing to the eye. So yeah, visually and it's, sound wise, I really enjoy this gun barrel. So for that, it's in my top 5 at number 5. So let's get to number 4. Like when I mentioned Living Daylights before, I think that one is very traditional, a bit too traditional for Dalton, really. But License to Kill is not. License to Kill's gun barrel is very striking, and you have the Michael Kamen score, and it as soon as you sit down and watch, you think, okay, I'm in for a different kind of Bond film, and that perfectly melds with License to Kill and Dalton himself. It just fits with the brutishness and the intensity of Dalton that's totally brought here by Kamen. Particularly for the gun barrel, I think it works exceptionally well. The gun barrel itself, visually, it's the same as Living Daylights, but it's all about that music that makes the License to Kill gun barrel so impactful and unique and entertaining. I love it. So for that reason, it gets number 4. Moving on to number 3. Live and Let Die is another one that's really all about the music. George Martin's score for Live and Let Die is one of my favorite scores of the entire franchise. I absolutely love it. And again, it has this wonderful energy, and it perfectly begins the new era of Bond with this nice excitement that you get from it. And I think Moore's performance here is, of course, my favorite of his 2 performances for the gun barrels. Visually, it's fine, but other than that, it's really, again, it's all about the music. I think maybe that's the bias is a bit too strong, and I should be looking at the other elements besides the music. But when you have a score like the Live and Let Die one done by an icon like George Martin, it's going to make an impact, and it does for me, for the gun barrel. So for that, it gets the 3rd spot. So number 2. I almost put this at number 1, I have to tell you, because Casino Royale's gun barrel is so freaking cool. I love, visually it's awesome. I love all the different aesthetic elements about it. I love the look of the gun barrel looking very shiny, the way it reflects Craig. I love that it marks the transition of the film from the black and white pre-title sequence to the color in the title sequence. Absolutely genius. I love the fact that it's representing Bond becoming 007 after he gets his second kill. He gets 007 or 00 status. It's just such a smart sequence, which is another reason why I think Quantum's is so bad, because they probably thought they were being clever by ending it with the gun barrel, but they just totally fumbled that. But this, they absolutely nailed. It's such a cool gun barrel sequence. And the whole pre-title sequence of Casino Royale is just outstanding. And this is the wonderful little cherry on top into the amazing titles. I think it's a perfect gun barrel sequence, but it doesn't fit in the typical gun barrel structure. It's not the beginning of it's the beginning of the film, but it's after the pre-title sequence. So I think for that, I couldn't quite put it at number 1. There is one gun barrel that I think is just a little bit better. Of course, it's GoldenEye. I mean, I've talked in previous Bond videos about how much I love GoldenEye, and that applies to the gun barrel. It, to me, is the perfect gun barrel. I mean, it's the same visually as the next two Brosnan films. Down to the Days uses a little bit different color grading, but Brosnan's performance in it is absolutely perfect. Confident walk, hides the gun, perfect turn, perfect final pose. There's nothing to complain about. He does it. I mean, maybe you could complain the fact that he doesn't really do anything unique with it. It's like as cynical, as clinical as it could be, and it's just by the books perfect. And there's, but I mean, Brosnan is, to me, the perfect Bond, and I think it's perfect the way he does the gun barrel. You could argue the music in this is a bit hit or miss. That's for GoldenEye as a whole. But I think I've always liked the music in the beginning of the film, from the pre-titles, including the gun barrel. And I think it makes for a very, he sets the vibe of GoldenEye with that sort of industrial sound, which I really enjoy for the beginning of GoldenEye. And I love this gun barrel. I think it's absolutely perfect. I think it is the quintessential gun barrel. I love that this is the one that introduced the CG gun barrel graphic, which, frankly, I wish they had kept throughout the Craig era, but at least we got it for the Brosnan era because it's perfect. I mean, whoever thought of the idea to just sort of make a CG moving render of the Maury Spinner design, I mean, that's just excellent. And it holds up today. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I mean, it looks a bit glossy maybe, but I'm sure they could have, updated it, to make it look a bit better for contemporary standards of visual effects. So I don't know why they abandoned it. What to me was a perfect gun barrel. Yeah, the perfect gun barrel. GoldenEye is the perfect James Bond gun barrel, in my opinion. So that was my ranking of the James Bond gun barrels. I know a lot of people think it's a pretty stupid thing to even consider ranking, but I've always had opinions on them, so I thought I would offer my opinions on them. And of course, let me know your rankings on the gun barrels. Do you agree with my rankings? Maybe you don't have to tell me the whole ranking, all 25, but maybe just tell me your top 5, or do you agree with my favorite being GoldenEye and my least favorite being Spectre? But yeah, I hope you enjoyed James Bond Day today. I'm recording this a couple days before James Bond Day, so hopefully we got some sort of announcements. There have been rumors stirring, but probably not. I did see that all the Bond films are back on Amazon Prime, which is nice. But I always hate the fact that they bring them on, in October, and then they slowly take them away throughout the year, which I was like, come on, just leave them on there. I mean, I own them all, but for some people that don't, it would be nice to have them there. But I did see that there's some new interviews with Barbara and Michael, which I'll have to check out. But I'm looking forward to seeing that. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, you know what to do, and I will see you next time.